This is Queerful Editor-in-Chief Winnie McCroy here with actor and playwright Jacob Storms. Jacob, congratulations on your new play, Tennessee Rising, The Dawn of Tennessee Williams. Now, I understand that you both wrote and performed this play. What initially attracted you to Tennessee Williams' story?
Well, it's a very strange circumstance that happened. I was doing a play in New York, one of the first shows I was doing out of school, and my high school in Portland, Oregon called me up out of the blue, and they asked me if I wanted to come out and do a speech at their scholarship fundraiser that they do every year. And the show that I was doing at the time thankfully said, yeah, you can go do it and then come back and do the show. And so I went out to Portland and I did this little speech. And just by happenstance, my middle school that I had gone to in Portland, Oregon, called Da Vinci, which was an arts magnet middle school where I really started to perform originally, they were also doing a fundraiser while I was there. And it was a screening of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof at the beautiful landmark movie palace in Portland called the Hollywood Theater. And they asked me, they knew I was in town, so they asked me to introduce the film and sing happy birthday to Elizabeth Taylor's ghost, because she had passed away by that point. But Elizabeth Taylor's granddaughter was hosting the screening. She had arranged for everything to come together, and she was actually the one who asked me to do it. And she was a parent at the school at that time, not when I was a student. So that was my first time seeing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and it was just an amazing experience. And I think I had seen Streetcar already, but seeing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof on the big screen like that was really stunning. And the next day, there's a pretty famous bookstore in Portland called Powell's Books.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother had a gift certificate that someone had given to her that she said she wasn't going to use. So she gave it to me. So I went to Powell's, and there were Tennessee's memoirs on display. And it was the updated version that had the cover with a photo of him when he was around my age now, a very serious portrait of him. And it looked like we were brothers. We looked very physically similar. And I felt, very inspired by Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. So I bought the memoir and I read it in like a day. And I was very drawn to him. I felt a strange connection to him. And I couldn't really explain it, but there was something about his love of humanity and interest in humanity that really resonated with me, and some of his upbringing. So that's when I really started. That was in 2011, I think. And then off and on, I started to put things together. I had a dear friend of mine named Taylor Negron, who is a pretty recognizable actor, who did a bunch of stuff in the 80s and 90s, who was a big support for me. He really told me I needed to do the show because I kept giving up and saying this is too overwhelming and just too crazy for me to take on. And he was like, no, you have to do it. You're the only one that can do it. So he was a huge, support. And then he passed away. And I really felt like I needed to get my act together and finally finish it. So his passing is really what kind of lit the fire under my butt to really do it. And there was a few kind of different versions that I was working on, and I had become friends with Charles Bush in New York while I was here. And he was actually the one who pushed me more in the direction of focusing on his younger years. And he gave me the huge book, like 600-page book called Tom, that's probably the best known authorized biography of Tennessee that focuses more on his younger years, the more unknown years.
Mhm.
But Charles was a big push for me also, and was very, very encouraging. So that's the beginning of how it came together, pretty much.
Wow, that's really impressive that you got someone with the laudits of Charles Bush to, work with you on this and just to help inspire you. And I wonder, as you say that you notice the physical similarity, if maybe you saw something of Tom in you and your journey. The play is looking at the 6 year period from 1939 to 1945 before Tom became Tennessee Williams. And I think it's interesting that you decided to investigate this famed queer writer's kind of origin story years rather than ones from when his career was established, as many people do. I'm not going to call it low hanging fruit, but it's a real challenge. And um, I just love to hear a little bit more about what you found out about his early days that transformed Tom into Tennessee Williams.
Well, after I read the memoir that he wrote in 1975, I believe, there was, like I said, that was kind of the first taste that I had that really inspired me. But as I investigated more, and I started to read his letters, and definitely reading Tom, that once Charles Bush gave that to me, I realized that there were a lot of things in his memoir that he either lied about a little or kind of left out completely. Like he didn't really want to talk about it. Or he kind of mentioned something in the memoir, but then he didn't really elaborate on it. Or he really changed it when he didn't have to. So I realized there was kind of a lane for me to explore those younger years, those unknown years, because he didn't really want to. And he did, he authorized Tom as a memoir, or a biography rather, when he was alive. He gave a bunch of his stuff to Lyle Leverich, who was a theater person and really had his permission to do that. I'm not sure if Tom was completed though when Tennessee was still alive. So I'm not sure if he had the chance to really read it or see it. But I felt like doing my show the way I wanted to do it in the years that I wanted to focus on would be kind of almost a companion piece to the memoir, which, most people would probably read the memoir before they read Tom, because Tom is kind of academic. It's interesting for someone who's really interested in Tennessee Williams, or working on something like I was working on, but the memoir is probably more available to people. It's a little more dishy and gossipy kind of. So that's probably more the mainstream thing that people would gravitate towards. But I realized, if you had read the memoir and then you came and saw my show, then you'd really have a complete picture of him, or a more complete picture of him, than you would if you had just read the memoir. So does that answer your question?
It does. And you spoke earlier, Jacob, about the different iterations that this play went through as you were getting it ready. And I understand. I want to touch on this first. I understand that you won the United Solo Award for Best One Man Show for this play, and I want to ask how it felt to get that initial affirmation of your work.
That was amazing. It was totally unexpected. I originally had only been given one performance slot for the solo festival in 2017, and it ended up being sold out. I didn't really do much advertising for it. Obviously, friends and family came, but a lot of it were strangers, people I didn't know. So that was really gratifying. And then as soon as I got off stage, the solo festival manager came up to me and said, "Can you do it again?" Which I was very happy about, because there were several people that I had wanted to come to that first show that weren't able to, that ended up being able to come to the second show. And so I only did 2 performances, but at the end of it, the Solo Fest manager kept saying, "Are you coming to the award ceremony? Are you coming?" I was like, maybe. They're like, "No, please come. You've got to come." I was like, "Okay." So I went, and that's when they gave me the award, and it was very unexpected and very gratifying, and it was a big boost in my confidence, because at that point I was all alone. I was doing it all alone. I was directing it all by myself, and um, it was a very solitary experience.
Mm-hmm.
Being a solo play in general is a solitary experience, but especially when you have no director, that is a little isolating. So getting that great response from the Solo Festival, United Solo Festival, was a very big push for me. I was really, really happy about it.
And now finally the play is going to be staged at AMT Theater in New York City, with the preview starting on February 19th, I believe. But this was a long time coming. It was initially slated to run at the Beaubourg Theater in New Orleans in March 2020. We all know how that ended up, canceled because of COVID, and then restaged in the spring of 2021 at the Cell Theater with outdoor audiences of capped at 20 people. What fueled you to get through all of this to finally get to your official theater debut?
It's certainly been a journey. It's been a journey in patience and keeping the faith. And I think just Alan has stuck with me. I mean, we'll talk about Alan Cumming probably in a minute, but when he came on board as my director, that was another just huge confidence boost for me in the show. And I knew that he wanted to stay involved, and I knew that I really wanted to do, a real run in New York.
How did you get him involved in the endeavor?
Well, another very strange kind of synchronistic circumstance. I had done several shows at Theater for the New City in the East Village in my early years in New York. And Charles Bush, actually, around that same time that I had been performing there, he started to, well, he's been playing there forever,
Mhm.
off and on. But around the time I was there, he had started to write shows specifically to do at Theater for the New City just for fun, where he wouldn't invite any press or anything. It would really just be kind of whoever knew about it would get there and get a ticket. So the first few years of him doing that and doing those different shows, I would just kind of sneak in, and because I knew people there and knew Charles, and I could just kind of stand in the back or something. But it got really, really popular pretty quickly. So there was one time that I couldn't get in. It was like packed.
Yeah,
So,
there's only 5 rows at Theater for the New City.
right. So I knew that he was going to be doing this new show. This was in the spring of 2018, I believe. And so I did the very unusual thing of buying a ticket ahead of time, like months ahead of time. And so I went to the show, and in the audience that night was Marilyn May, the famed, amazing cabaret singer,
Mhm.
and Alan Cumming. And I had worked with Marilyn a little bit. And so when we were all waiting in the lobby afterwards to say hi to Charles, Marilyn introduced me to Alan. And it was very, brief interaction. Hi, nice to meet you. And I was already following him on Instagram. And so that night, I think I commented in one of his recent posts, and I said, "Great to meet you tonight." And he messaged me back, and he had seen, because I had done the show already. So I had a poster of it on my Instagram. So he said, "I really want to see your show. I love Tennessee Williams. When are you doing it?" And I was actually on my way to do it at the St. Louis Tennessee Williams Festival, like right when this was happening. So I got a recording of it at the St. Louis Tennessee Williams Festival that I was able to show to Alan. And then he had invited me to do it at his Club Cumming.
Mhm.
And then eventually, I worked up the courage to ask him if he would come on as my director, because I was still doing it alone at that point. And we had a lunch meeting in January of 2019, I believe. And he kind of went over some things that he, wanted to change a little bit. And they were all things that I also wanted to change. And then he took a couple more days and he said, okay, let's do it.
And you spoke a little bit earlier about his involvement as director, helping you get through all this mishigas with COVID and restaging and outdoor theater, audiences to get to this point. Was having him as your director one of the things that kept you steady and to reach this finish line?
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, it was just such a unique thing for him to come on board on the show. This is, as far as I know, the only original play he has ever directed so far. So I just feel like, I would be crazy to just let it all, fall away. And, this is a show that I can do for a few more years. Once I get too old for it, I'd like to publish it and, allow other people to do it. So I gotta do it, while I can do it, because it's young Tennessee. So I gotta do it while I'm young. I'm not getting any younger. So, yeah, but certainly Alan's faith in me in the show is just, I would be crazy to just let it all fall apart. So I gotta keep going.
And I wonder if you have any kind of funny anecdote that you want to share from your rehearsal sessions.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. There were a few things that happened. I think the most kind of thing that stands out in my mind was just kind of a few moments where, we were there putting it on its feet, and I kind of had a little out of body experience a couple times where I just, I saw Alan like standing there in front of me, telling me something. I was like, oh, wow, it's really Alan. It's really him, because, he's just someone who's always kind of been in my consciousness, I guess, since I was a young person. And I've just always been so inspired by him, and as a performer and as a human being. So there was several moments where I had to kind of like pinch myself and come back into my body and be like, okay, you're working right now. Yeah, that was something. I remember something funny that stood out was, because he's such good friends with Monica Lewinsky. And I remember saying to him, and hoping, he would tell Monica, but she probably already knows. I was like, Monica saved Social Security. And he was like, oh? I was like, yeah, the whole thing that happened at that point kind of stopped this thing from happening where everybody, was going to privatize Social Security, which would not be a good thing, which they're actually trying to do right now. And he's like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. So I don't know, that's something funny that stands out. He was just so professional, and I was just so impressed with him. He was very, very on point. He was very focused, and yeah, it was just an amazing. I just hope, one day I can do what he did for me, because he worked on all of this, out of the kindness of his heart, basically. Not as a charity, but I think because he really believes in me and the show,
Mm-hmm.
Williams. But I really hope I can pay it forward one day and do what he did for someone else, because he didn't have to do any of that. And I'm really, really impressed by him constantly.
Well, I think it's a lot to take on the role of director, but a lot of this weight goes on you. It's a solo show. I don't know if they call it a one-hander in the industry or if it's just a two-hander, but I understand that this is not your first solo show. You are recognized as the youngest actor to ever have performed Doug Wright's Pulitzer Prize winning 40 character solo play, I Am My Own Wife. Did this rigorous stage work inure you a little bit to the challenges of staging your own solo play where you only have to be one character?
Definitely. Definitely. That was such another really unbelievable opportunity that I had when I was in high school. A director that I had worked with at this school that I had gone to in Portland called the Northwest Academy. His name was David Wagstaff. He's still working in Portland. He saw a production of I Am My Own Wife in Portland that I was supposed to see because I knew the person doing it. But for some reason, I wasn't able to see it, which in retrospect, I'm glad that I wasn't able to see it because I think had I seen it in person, I would have been terrified to do it. And I also would have had, this other person's performance kind of in my brain, which you never really want. So I didn't see it, but he saw it, and he came to me with the script, and he gave it to me. I think 16. I think I was a sophomore in high school, and he said, "We're gonna do the show." Basically, he didn't he didn't force me to do it, but he basically said, "This, if you do this show, you will either understand or learn enough about yourself where you will want to really pursue being an actor, or you will never want to do it again." And so I said, okay, let's do it. And we worked on it off and on for 2 years, which was another unusual thing. I mean, you never have the opportunity to work on a show off and on for 2 years, but that probably was a huge help in actually me doing it successfully. And we also had an amazing figure who was associated with the school named Ursula Bacon, who actually survived the early Nazi years in Germany. She got out, I think, in 1939. There were 15 boats leaving Berlin and going to Shanghai, China. So she and her family were able to get on, I think, the last boat to Shanghai. So she grew up as a German Jew during World War II in China, while the Japanese were burning China to the ground. And so her involvement was also amazing and was a huge inspiration for me doing the show. And she actually introduced the show. Like, I think she was set to do it maybe once or twice originally, and she ended up doing it like 10 or 15 times. And she would tell a little bit of her story. And I remember she would always say, we don't have to love each other. We just have to get along, which I think is something we can all, apply to these days also. We don't have to love each other. We just have to kind of get on with it and try to find some way to coexist, even if we disagree on things.
Absolutely.
Which is so important, I think. You're never going to convince anybody of anything, but, we're all human. So that was really, really got the audience going. And a lot of times they would be crying as I came on stage. So she really kind of like was my opening act and really got them in a great mindset.
Wow, for Ursula. Well, I think you rose to the challenge at such a young age that I can see you're going to be able to rise to the challenge again when this show kicks off in the upcoming weekend. And I wanted to ask you, Jacob, as we wrap up our interview, I want to ask you to leave folks with a message about why it's important that they come out and see your show.
I think, I've had the opportunity to do it many times now in many places, and I think it's been very interesting to see the reaction from people who obviously, if you're a theater person or, showbiz person, or you love Tennessee Williams, you're going to probably love the show because it has so many Easter eggs. This whole 6-year period that I focus on is really where he was inspired to write all of his major characters. He actually met a lot of these people in real life, like Big Daddy and Maggie the Cat. These were real people that he encountered. So that's super interesting for people that love Tennessee Williams. But I've also had the opportunity to do it for people that know nothing about Tennessee Williams, and a few people who have never even seen a play. And they've also really enjoyed it. So I think it's a show for everybody. And I wanted to leave you with one thing that was kind of strange. When I had done it for the first time at the United Solo Festival, I, had been off and on, picking it up, putting it down as I was writing it and getting kind of frustrated with myself. But that first time that I did it at Solo Festival, I realized it covers that 6-year period of his life. And then I realized it took me 6 years to write it. And that was a very strange thing for me to realize, because I realized it was all kind of falling into place, and it all clicked in when it needed to. But that being said, I think it's a show for everybody. I think it can inspire other people, hopefully, to maybe, do something that they were afraid of doing, because I was certainly very intimidated by this. And I think there's also a lot of things that you will hear in it about that era, like World War II era that it takes place in, that you probably won't hear in other places. Tennessee was a young man when World War II was happening, and he had, a different perspective on things that you will probably not really hear anywhere else. So I think that's also a really good reason to come out, because you'll probably, hopefully, learn something about that time, that it wasn't all, rah patriotic. There were a lot of very controversial things happening that we are kind of only now coming to terms with, hopefully. And hopefully my show will inspire people to investigate that period more also, which has a lot of parallels to the period we're living in now.
Well, I just love the synchronicity. As we close this interview, this is actor and playwright Jacob Storms, Tennessee Rising. Thank you so much for your time, Jacob. Tennessee Rising will run February 19th through April 2nd at AMT Theater in New York City. Get your tickets now. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.